Hi, welcome to the Learnovative Agile and Scrum video series. My name is Vijay Bandaru. I'm a certified Scrum trainer, certified team coach, and certified enterprise coach from Scrum Alliance. We create these videos to help you understand the concepts of Scrum easily and implement in your products. In this video, we're going to talk about sprint planning, one of the events of Scrum. So we are going to explore the process of sprint planning, a sample sprint backlog, how it looks like, some anti-patterns of the sprint planning, and some tips to make the sprint planning effective. So let's start. Sprint planning is the first event within the sprint. That means the sprint begins with the sprint planning. So what is the purpose of the sprint planning? The purpose of the sprint planning is the Scrum team collaborates to understand the work of the sprint. That means it's a formal opportunity for the Scrum team to come together, understand, and lay down the work for the current sprint. The participants of the sprint planning are mandatory participants or Scrum team, which includes product owner, Scrum master, and all the developers. Optional subject matter experts, in case they need any support or help from external teams. Sometimes they may need some support from networking team or infrastructure team or some subject matter experts like functional specialists. In case they need, they can invite the optional subject matter experts for the sprint planning. The time box for the sprint planning is maximum 8 hours for 1 month sprint and shorter for shorter sprints, which means less than 8 hours for less than 1 month sprint. The sprint planning occurs on the first working day of the sprint, and the frequency is every sprint, one planning. So that helps you to make it iterative planning. And the possible inputs for sprint planning are product backlog, definition of done, past performance, and projected capacity of the current sprint. The reason for referring product backlog as input is the work into the sprint backlog will be pulled from the product backlog, which is prioritized by the product owner. The definition of done is required because sometimes the items may be estimated or re-estimated in the sprint planning. So a reference for estimation is definition of done. And the past performance is the velocity. Last couple of sprints, what's the best velocity, worst velocity, average velocity. And projected capacity is nothing but the current sprint capacity, like how many holidays are there, if there are any. Are there any people taking personal time off, or any developers attending some outside sprint related work, like attending some trainings or participating in hackathons like that. So the sprint planning comes with 3 topics. The first topic is why. Why the sprint is valuable, important, and why should we invest time, effort, money into the sprint. So here, the entire Scrum team, which includes developers, product owner, and Scrum master, collectively and collaboratively decides the sprint goal for the sprint. So that means the entire Scrum team collaboratively decides the sprint goal. So how does it happen? The product owner will explain a high-level business objective to be achieved, and they all discuss and convert into an achievable sprint goal. For example, in this case, let's say creating a basic shopping cart functionality. They have considered that as a goal because it helps people to purchase items in a e-commerce product like Amazon. So that's the goal for the current sprint. Once they have clear goal identified, they will go to the next topic, which is what. It means what can be achieved in the current sprint to accomplish the goal. So here, first the product owner will explain the product backlog items. to the developers according to the priority of the backlog. So the developers may have any questions, clarifications, assumptions, doubts related to those items. So ask questions to the product owner. And the product owner will answer those questions. In general, these items were already discussed in the previous sprint backlog refinement. Most of the items, 80 to 90% clear, and they were estimated also. But in case some clarifications pending in the previous sprint backlog refinement, they can still ask in the sprint planning. And then once the developers are clear, they will see any estimation or re-estimation is required for those items. So they use the definition of done as a reference. What are all the things they have to do in order to consider the item is done? Then the developers will come up with forecast. Forecast means how many items can be selected into the sprint backlog based on the past performance and projected capacity. So they will look into the last couple of sprints, best, worst, average velocity, what's the current sprint capacity available, all these things. They will select the items according to the priority decided by the product owner. For example, let's consider these are the items pulled: search, list, add to cart, change quantity, modify billing address and shipping address, and payment using Google Pay. Google Pay is one of the digital payment options in India. So that means these are the items selected in order to achieve this goal. Then once they have what section identified, they will go to the next section, which is how the selected work can be accomplished during the sprint. Here, first the developers will look into the high level architecture, design, all these things to be done for the selected items, which means these items. What kind of maybe new database elements required, like stored procedures or tables or triggers or anything, or we need to extend existing things. Are there any new APIs or new interfaces or new classes have to be created in order to achieve? So these are the things. And then they decompose the selected backlog items into tasks, smaller tasks, which means maybe front-end development, test case creation, Java coding, database coding, unit testing, regression testing, code review feedback, documentation, like that. Again, they take the reference of definition of done in order to come up with the tasks. So this entire discussion of why, what, how will help the developers to create the output of the sprint planning. So with the help of product owner and scrum master, the developers will prepare the sprint backlog, which is the output of sprint planning. So sprint planning consists of three things: the selected sprint goal, that is number one. In order to achieve this goal, what are the items were selected into the sprint backlog, that is two, and how they are going to accomplish those items, a high level plan. These three things will be embedded into the sprint backlog, which is the output of sprint planning. So a sample sprint backlog looks like this. After the sprint planning. And please note, this is not given by Scrum Guide. This is not template recommended by Scrum Guide, because Scrum is a framework. So Scrum Guide does not give you any templates or structures or designs like that. So based on my experience, these are the things that you can include into the sprint backlog. So if you look at it closely, it shows clearly what is the sprint goal. In order to achieve the sprint goal, what are the PBS selected? in order to accomplish these items, what are the tasks required for each of these items. And you can see the sprint number also, days remaining in the sprint, and the daily scrum time, and start date of the sprint, end date of the sprint, which will help the developers and product owner, scrum master to understand these things, and everybody will have transparency. And you can also see the blank burn down. You can use burn down or burn up. Developers are responsible for sprint tracking. So either they can use the burn down chart or burn up chart. So the x-axis represents the sprint duration, which is in this case, let's say 2 weeks. And y-axis represents the amount of work pulled into the sprint backlog. For example, if you take it 8 points, 3 points, 11, 11 plus 5, 16, 16 plus 8, 24. So 24 story points worth of items they have selected into the sprint backlog. And you can see the impediment tracker also here. And some improvements from previous sprint retrospective for process improvements, people improvements, tools, techniques improvements, so that they can help reminding the developers and to work on those improvements to become better. So after few days, currently these are all blank because as of now, the sprint planning is just completed. So they have planned the work, but they did not start the work. So if you look at this screen, you can see sample sprint backlog after couple of days of work, maybe 3 to 4 days of work. If you look at the difference here, the first item is moved to done because all the tasks are completed for the first item, and the developers might have verified the definition of done. They might have shown this item to the product owner, and product owner verified the acceptance criteria and approved that. So, and also you can see the burn down is coming down because this item, 8 story points completed. So total 24, 24 minus 8 is 16. So day 4, that is how it is. And the second item, 3 tasks are completed. 1 task is in progress, 2 tasks remaining. So the developers continuously update the sprint backlog throughout the sprint to enhance the transparency. So everybody will know what work is completed, what work is in progress, and what are the items that are yet to be done in the sprint. And these are the impediments, what impediments are resolved, what impediments are in progress. And I would recommend to divide this impediment board into 2 sections. So these are the team level impediments where the developers are responsible because they should be self-managing. And wherever they have power, ability, knowledge, skills to resolve the impediments, they can resolve on their own. These are global, organizational, systemic impediments. Hopefully, Scrum Master will help to get the required support to resolve the impediments for the developers. So it will be easy for tracking the impediments, team level impediments, and global, organizational, systemic impediments using this board. So after a few days of work, it will be looking like this. Once next 3 to 4 days, for example, this is done and these 2 tasks are so done, and this item will be verified against the definition of done, and the developer shown it to product owner. Let's say product owner approved it. Then it will come here, and again 3 story points. So let's imagine day 6 it is done. So 16 minus 3, 13 somewhere here, 13. So that is how the burn down also will be updated continuously. The developers can use either burn down or burn up, doesn't matter. So overall, the sprint backlog is the property of the developers, which helps them to organize, track, manage the sprint work throughout the sprint, which helps them to have the higher transparency, not only for the developers, for also the Scrum Master and the product owner. So there are some anti-patterns of sprint planning. So these anti-patterns have to be avoided because they will show negative impact. So if you are a Scrum Master or a developer or product owner, be watchful about these anti-patterns. For example, the first one talks about too many people in the sprint planning. Imagine, other than Scrum team, you are inviting the whole lot of stakeholders, management, customers, marketing team, sales team. Too many people, too many opinions, so they cannot focus, and too many arguments will be defocusing. So I would recommend the product owner should have a meeting with the stakeholders, maybe 2-3 days before the sprint planning, show the product backlog as it is and take their inputs, any last minute changes, priority changes, or some functionality additions, removals, so that the product owner can come prepared for the sprint planning. Similarly, product owner demands developers to take more work than they can do. So according to Scrum, the developers decide how much work can be pulled into the sprint backlog, because the product owner will decide the product backlog order. But the product owner cannot decide how many items can be pulled, because that is the developers, they are doing the work. So they should have an idea how many items they can pull based on the velocity and based on the projected capacity. Similarly, only few developers participate rather than all the developers in the sprint planning. So imagine there are 7 to 8 developers in the sprint Scrum team. And if you have only 2 to 3 people and remaining people are not joining, they don't have clarity on what was the sprint goal identified and what items, why they are doing what they are doing. They don't have a clarity. Plus, they don't have commitment on the work they have selected, because they have not participated in the sprint planning. So ensure that if you're a Scrum Master, ensure that all the developers, as much as possible, if 1 or 2 people are on vacation, that's okay. But if people are available and they're not participating, as a Scrum Master, you have to educate them why the sprint planning is important, how their participation will help the sprint planning to be more effective. So through coaching. And product backlog does not contain enough items. So once you are into the sprint planning, if the product backlog doesn't have enough items to keep the sprint capacity filled, then instead of focusing on sprint planning, you have to focus on some randomly items to be filled into the product backlog. So I would recommend for this, do a proper backlog refinement. My recommendation would be, if your velocity of the team is X story points, then 2 to 3x story points worth of items always ready. So keep this. It's not a Scrum practice or recommended by Scrum. Based on my experience, if you keep the items in the product backlog for the next 2 to 3 sprints, at least 1 to 2 sprints, next to 1 to 2 sprints, it will be good, so that you don't get this situation in the sprint planning. An output focus sprint planning rather than outcome focus. So instead of randomly selecting some items, it's always good to have a sprint goal, which is the outcome you want to achieve, and accordingly select the least possible items. That is what we call as less is more. So first identify the goal, which is the outcome you want to achieve, why you want to spend the time, money, and effort, and then accordingly identify the suitable, instead of just focusing on output. And sprint planning taking too long time than the recommended time box. So sometimes it gets into too many arguments, or sometimes they get into the discussion of the technical elements, like what should be the stored procedure logic here, what should be the method of the class, or what is the new interface we need to. So that can be done after the sprint planning. So as a Scrum Master, you have to explain them, educate and train the team and product owner in terms of how to make the sprint planning time boxed. A majority of the sprint planning time spent on estimating. This is also not a good thing, because by the time you come to the sprint planning, some of the items which are required to fill the sprint capacity should have been already estimated in the previous backlog refinement. So focus on more backlog refinement. For this and this, you can focus on more backlog refinement. That will help to solve this anti-pattern. And product owner controlling the estimates of the backlog items. Generally, according to Scrum, the developers are responsible for sizing the backlog items, because they know what is the complexity involved. They know what is the uncertainty involved, what is the volume of work involved to complete an item. So it would be good product owner to leave the estimation thing to the developers, which will help to have more accountability and commitment. Imagine if a product owner tells the developers, guys, I want you to do login using Facebook ID and I'll give 2 story points. I want you to do my dashboard element with some 3 to 4 widgets and I'll give 8 story points like this. If the product owner decides, the developers will not have any commitment and accountability towards, because they are not giving the estimate. So let the developers ensure what is the functionality involved, what are the acceptance criteria to be achieved, and what are the dependencies of those items, all these things in the previous sprint backlog refinement, and get it estimate and use the sprint planning to revise the estimate in case any changes in the as acceptance criteria. Disconnected instead of collaborative sprint planning. That means not all the three people, product owner, developers, and scrum master, collaboratively doing, they are working like a silo. That is also not a good idea. It's not a good pattern. So no sprint goal defined for the sprint. Instead, just taking some randomly selected backlog items. So the sprint goal defines why we are investing the money and time and effort. So starting with the goal is always help to keep everybody focused on one direction, and everybody knows why they are doing what they are doing. So sprint goal is important. And developers forecast the work for the sprint randomly instead of capacity based. So you need to help the developers to understand how they can fill the items based on the last couple of sprints, best, worst, and average velocities, and the current sprint capacity, so that they can have little more accurate planning instead of just randomly selecting items. And no product owner presence in the sprint planning. The product owner should come with a business objective for the sprint, and it will be converted into a sprint goal. So if the product owner is not attending the sprint planning, then probably the developers may not have an idea on what is the goal to be achieved. So the product owner presence is also equally important as the developers or scrum master. So be watchful about these anti-patterns in the sprint planning. And slowly, if you find in your Scrum project, slowly focus on one by one through coaching, mentoring, training, teaching, and proper facilitation techniques and skills. You can help these anti-patterns to be addressed effectively. Now, coming to what are some tips to make the sprint planning effectively? Preparation before the meeting. Before coming to the sprint planning, what you can do? There are a couple of things you can plan here. Refine the product backlog. As I also mentioned in the couple of minutes back, make sure the product backlog is refined. Large items are split into smaller items. Each item has a proper acceptance criteria as defined. Each item is estimated. And also reflect the last sprint review feedback into the product backlog. Before coming to the sprint planning, ensure the product owner has all the feedback received from last sprint review is reflected according to the priority. So that in case something which is important, valuable, urgent received from sprint review, that can be put into the top of the product backlog, which can be estimated and taken up into the current sprint. Similarly, effective meeting facilitation. So usually, as needed, the Scrum Master will facilitate the sprint planning and other events also. So focus on a couple of things here as part of the facilitation. Time boxing. So time to time, reminding them the time remaining, and ensure that discussions are happening on the important items. They're not deviating from the purpose of the sprint planning, and everybody understand the purpose, and encourage participation from all the participants, like all the programmers, testers, UI, UX people, so that the information is flown properly. The next tip can be clear why, what, and how, which means identifying a clear goal for the sprint in collaboration with all the people, product owner, developers, and Scrum Master. Most importantly, business value oriented sprint goals. So in my opinion, the role of Scrum Master in sprint planning is to help them to create smart sprint goals, business value oriented sprint goals, and help the product owner should identify the supporting product backlog items to achieve the goal. And when developers are decomposing the tasks, make sure they are taking less than or equal to 1 day related tasks, whatever tasks they have to do, like front-end coding, database coding, Java coding, like that, so that something which is in in progress today will be moved to done tomorrow. So a smooth flow of the work progress is visible. So it increases the transparency. And the next tip you can consider as consider velocity and capacity. So most of the teams, they randomly pull items. Okay, this sprint we will do 30 story points worth of items or 25 story point worth of items, like that. But ensure they have some kind of historical information, some kind of supporting knowledge, like past performance, maybe last one or two sprints of velocity information, and projected capacity, who is going to take personal time off, and who is going to attend some outside sprint work. Maybe are there any public holidays, something information, so that the developers can plan how much effort, how much amount of the work can be pulled into the sprint backlog. And you can consider the last tip is clear roles and responsibilities. Here, everybody should understand what is their role. Product owner, scrum master, developers, each one is clear. If not, as a scrum master, you will teach them briefly before starting the sprint planning. Usually, as a scrum master, you need to ensure your team, developers and product owner are aware of Scrum. If not, then maybe conduct a 1 day or 2 days of Scrum training to ensure everybody understands what are the Scrum events, artifacts, roles and responsibilities, accountabilities, and backlog refinement, Scrum values, all these things. So while doing, it will help them to understand each accountability and corresponding responsibilities and rights also. And ensure that they are collaborative. Instead of competitive or competing, they are collaborative, highly collaborative, and transparent with information, assumptions, and these things. And if you are working in a live virtual environment, maybe using corresponding visual tools will really help to make the sprint planning more effective. That's about sprint planning. We discussed what is sprint planning, who are all involved, what are the 3 topics: inputs, outputs, purpose, time boxes. And we discussed how a sprint backlog looks like in the beginning of the sprint planning and after 3 to 4 days of work. And what are some anti-patterns of the sprint planning, how you can address them as a Scrum Master, and some tips to make the sprint planning effectively. I hope you have liked this video. And please like, share, and subscribe if you have liked the video. And in case you are looking for any public or private Agile, Scrum, or SAFe related trainings, feel free to contact us using this information. We are very happy to help you. Thank you so very much and have a nice time.